Story today, day that changed my life. And I really encourage you to listen to this one, not just for the story, but more for the message, because I think there's a message in here that everybody's going to be able to relate to. Now, before I tell you about that day, I need to give you a little bit of a backstory. Growing up, I was always told by my mom that it was her and her alone who would do the birthdays, do the Christmas, wrap the presents, sign the cards, that my dad didn't really take a lot of interest in those types of things. Which, to my mom's defense, I think she was right. It just wasn't my dad's thing. But my mom, it was a very, really important thing to her. So she always did her best to go above and beyond to make sure Christmases and birthdays and holidays were really special. When I moved away from home at 18, I started a habit, a tradition, what have you, of saving every single birthday or Christmas card anyone would give to me. For whatever reason, these cards took on this really deep and meaningful just sentiment to me, and they became some of my most treasured and prized possessions. In fact, I've had to be evacuated from my home twice over the last several years when the various fires have threatened Santa Barbara. And each of those times, the first thing I grabbed during those evacuations was not computer or anything like that. It was this, now it's gotten to be a massive box of cards I've saved over the years from people. And I still continue that today. Any birthday card, Christmas card, holiday card, those types of things people send me, I only save those. Fast forward after a couple of years, maybe I was 23 years old or so. And I remember this particular birthday getting a solo card from my dad. And I was shocked because what I'd always been taught by my mom was my dad never cared to do those types of things. And I can remember opening the card, and this was a card that he had. You remember when it was a really cool thing to do to make the cards on the computer? You would go on there and there was a little program, and then you would print the card up and you'd mail it out and stuff like that. And it was, for a while, everybody was doing that. And it was one of these handmade cards that my dad had made on the computer, which meant he had taken the time to go in there, figure out the graphics, figure out the font, that whole thing. And there was some money inside of it, and he had signed it, "Love You, Dad." And I remember looking at this card and feeling this emotion just overwhelm me. And it wasn't an emotion of happiness, love, or joy. It was an emotion of anger. I remember getting so angry and so pissed off looking at that card because I was thinking to myself, how dare you? You know, you had all these years when I was living at home. We had this time to form this bond, be closer together. And now you're going to try to buy my love. Now you're going to try to buy my affection. Now you're going to try to buy my bond. And I was just pissed off. And so I tore up the card. I threw it in the trash, but I took the money out and put it in my wallet. It's the only card I never saved. Fast forward a few years later to February 1st, 2010, and I get a phone call from my mom that my dad had died. And if any of you have ever been there before and had those life-changing phone calls, you know that there's this inaudible emotion that comes surging up inside of you afterwards, followed by sometimes what seems like just an infinite amount of time of silence and stillness. Even though you might be externally expressing noise, your internal world is so chaotic that there's this eerie silence almost that only can come with the loss of a loved one. And I remember that silence followed me the entire drive to Northern California where I grew up. It's about a 600-mile drive from where I was at the time. And I drove almost the entire drive in silence. No radio, no nothing, just silence. And I was crying. You know, every now and then there would be some crying. I talked to maybe one or two friends on the way, but otherwise it was just silence. February 2nd, 2010 was the day that changed my life. So my life changed for sure on the day my dad died. And what was tragic about my dad, what was especially tragic, was my dad had spent the last 2 years of his life going through treatment for colon cancer. He'd done the chemo, the surgery, the whole thing. And prior to his death, 2 weeks to be specific, he'd gone to the doctor. The doctor looked him in the eye, shook his hand, and said, "Congratulations, Mike, you are cancer-free. You've beat cancer. You have your entire life in front of you. You have your whole life to live. So my dad was under this illusion that he was getting promised more time, and he was going to have all this time left to do the things that matter most to him, to finally take the trip he wanted to take, to make amends for the relationships he needed to make amends for, to ask for forgiveness, to cultivate love, to go after dreams, and to stop playing by the rules or the things that he thought he had to do to live a quality life. He was really committed to going for it. And then 2 weeks later, he drops dead. So on February 2nd, 2010, that's the day that my life really changed. On that day, I went to my dad's office to clean it out. And when I got there, his desk was remarkably empty, save for his computer, which, for whatever reason, I felt compelled to turn the computer on. His desktop was almost equally as empty, and I was clicking around, and there just happened to be one file up there that caught my eye. And I double clicked on the file. That silence that I had felt from the first day, it was following me. I still had barely spoke. I still had barely said anything other than tears. And in that moment, the silence was just absolutely decimated by my sobs. Because what I clicked on in that file, what opened on the screen in front of me, was the birthday card my dad had made for me. The same card I had torn up several years before. And in that moment, on that day, my life changed forever, because I realized something. I realized that how much of my life had been lived based on the perceptions of others. I realized how much of my life had been lived based on what I was taught and told by other people. I realized that I had never gotten to know my dad or learned to see him through my own eyes, because I had learned to see him through my mom's eyes and the relationship she and my dad had. I realized in that moment that my dad, he wasn't a natural at making cards or doing that type of thing. It wasn't what he was taught. It wasn't how he was raised. And I had put my expectation and my mom's expectation on him that it should just be something he does, and that he should just know how to show love for me, and he should just do those things because as a dad, that's what he's supposed to do. And I realized in that moment that if I hadn't been so ignorant and here and stubborn to see beyond my own limited view, I would have seen just how special it was that my dad had made that effort. I would have allowed myself to feel just how much love he felt, and that he felt for me, that he would take the time, the energy to go and try to figure out the computers. My dad was no computer whiz by any means. That he would take the time to figure out how to do that, that he would print it up himself, that he would mail it himself, that he would sign it himself, stuff he had never been good at doing. But yet he was willing to make the effort for me. Oftentimes we will go through life with the belief that people don't care, that bad things have happened, that there's limitations on what we can experience, that we can't do something, that we're incapable of this. And more often than not, those are just perceptions that we've been taught. And the reason that we experience limitation in our life is not because there's actually limitation. It's because we've perceptually limited ourselves from experiencing. Think about that for a moment. Think about your own life. How much love, joy, happiness you've allowed yourself to not experience because you put a perceptual limitation on it. And not to say that you did this intentionally or consciously, that you just woke up one day and said, okay, I'm not going to see this for at all. You've likely been taught it. You've likely been conditioned to believe it. That's what you've known for so long, and no one's to fault you for that. I certainly didn't realize it. But once I did, my life changed forever. Because it was like all of a sudden I went from this kind of vision of the world to seeing that, and I started to look at the life around me and think, my gosh, how many other things have I been depriving myself of? One of the great ironies of my life is growing up, one of the things I wanted more than anything was the love from my father, and it was there all the time. I just didn't allow myself to see it because he wasn't showing it in the way that I was expecting him to. And I had learned to see him through a biased set of eyes. You want more of the good stuff out of life? Work on changing your own perceptions. Oftentimes, our greatest gifts of our life are just on the outside of the narrow perceptions we've developed. Work on expanding this, and you open yourself up to receive anything and everything you could want out of life. That's my story. I hope that you found this story to be helpful. I appreciate